Welcome to OOTO, the Out of the Office investigation into personal health actualization. I'm Sue, and with me is Bob. Today, we're discussing edible mushrooms for mental and physical health. You know, we're about to go on a really fascinating journey into the world of fungi. We're going to explore, well, everything, from that mushroom you toss in your salad to some really powerful compounds being studied in like the most advanced neuroscience labs. So the big question is, can a simple mushroom really change our health? Let's find out. I am so ready for this, Sue. And you're right, it's a journey with a really clear map. First, we're starting with what you know, the mushrooms we eat all the time, and uncovering some pretty surprising health benefits. Then, we'll get into the more mysterious stuff, right? The mind-altering world of psilocybin. We'll look at what it does to the brain, and we'll also get real about the potential risks. And finally, we'll pull it all together and ask, could mushrooms be part of a totally new way of thinking about our health? Okay, so let's start right where we're all comfortable, the kitchen. Seriously, just think about the last time you were chopping up some mushrooms for a stir fry or maybe an omelet. Did you ever, for a second, think that this little ingredient might be, well, a secret powerhouse for your health? Turns out there is way more going on with these fungi than you might think. And that is a question that researchers have taken incredibly seriously. I mean, we're talking about a huge study, Sue, over 6,600 adults. And they were looking into this really fascinating idea. Is there a connection between the mushrooms we eat and our thyroid health? They were zeroing in on this condition called subclinical hypothyroidism. It's kind of a sneaky, under-the-radar version of an underactive thyroid that can mess with your energy, your metabolism, but it often goes undiagnosed. And honestly, what they found was it was pretty remarkable. Oh, this is where it gets so good, Bob. Okay, so look at this chart with me. That hazard ratio of 1.00, think of that as your baseline risk, right? That's for people who almost never eat mushrooms. But watch what happens. Just eating them a few times a week, that middle row, your risk is cut almost in half, a ratio of 0.53. And what if you're eating mushrooms 4 or more times a week? Well, now we're talking about your risk dropping by a whopping 70%. I mean, that is an incredible difference from something so simple. And it gets even more dramatic, Sue. For one specific group in the study, the results were just staggering. This number you're looking at, 0.14, that was the hazard ratio for obese individuals who ate mushrooms that often. To put that in perspective, that means their risk of developing these thyroid issues just plummeted by an incredible 86%. Now, it's important to say this super strong protective link wasn't seen in non-obese individuals in this particular analysis. But for a huge part of the population, wow, it really makes you wonder what else is hiding in the produce aisle. It's just such a powerful reminder, isn't it? The choices we make at the dinner table can have this massive ripple effect on our health. This isn't about some fancy, expensive pill or a complicated diet. It's proof that sometimes the simplest things we eat can be the most powerful. And believe me, this is just scratching the surface of what we're going to talk about today. Okay, so we've seen this incredible evidence for how mushrooms can support our physical bodies in a really specific way. But what about our minds? This is where our whole conversation takes a really interesting turn. We're shifting gears now, moving from the mushrooms in our pantry to a much more mysterious and, for a lot of people, a controversial type of fungus. But as you're about to see, their effect on our mental health could be just as profound, if not more so. Right. We're talking about a compound called psilocybin. It's the active ingredient in what people call magic mushrooms. For literally centuries, cultures around the world have used these fungi in spiritual ceremonies. But now, modern science is taking a really serious look. And to do that, we're going to examine a huge study by Nayak and colleagues. It's actually the largest of its kind, and it followed thousands of people who use psilocybin, not in a lab, but out in the real world. So let's paint a picture of who was in this study. We're talking about nearly 3,000 people, mostly in their 40s, generally well-educated, and this is the key part. They were driven by a desire for self-exploration. These weren't patients in a clinical trial. They were just regular people curious about their own minds and looking for personal growth. And you have to keep that context, that intention, in mind as we look at what they found. It's a huge piece of the puzzle. And the findings were, they were just jaw-dropping. This chart is showing anxiety levels before and after taking psilocybin. And you can see this absolutely massive drop in anxiety just a few weeks later. And it wasn't just some temporary feeling, Look, months later, it's still way, way lower than where they started. It's almost like the experience hit a reset button on their anxiety. And here's a wild detail, Bob. The more meaningful and mystical a person said their experience was, the bigger the drop in anxiety. The meaning was directly connected to the benefit. And it went deeper than just feeling less anxious. People actually reported that the way they thought and managed their emotions had changed. You know how sometimes your mind gets stuck in a loop, like a whirlpool of negative thoughts you can't get out of? Well, it seems like psilocybin helped people break free. They reported being better able to reframe situations in a positive way, that's cognitive reappraisal, and they had more cognitive flexibility so they could see new solutions to old problems. And again, this wasn't temporary. It was like they had a new tool in their mental toolbox that lasted.
And you could see these changes ripple out into their everyday lives. I think we all know what burnout feels like, right? That total exhaustion, feeling cynical, just detached from everything. Well, this study found a really powerful anti-burnout effect. People felt way less strained, more engaged with their lives, and eventually even with their work. It's like the experience reconnected them to a sense of purpose. And that is a powerful, powerful antidote to burnout. You're listening to OOTO with research by author Paul Bullo.
So for me, this is where it gets absolutely mind-blowing. We have this idea that our personalities are pretty much set in stone once we become adults. But this study is suggesting that a single experience with psilocybin could lead to lasting changes in some of our most basic traits. People literally became more extroverted, more outgoing, more sociable, and at the same time, they became significantly less neurotic, so less prone to things like worry and anxiety. It just makes you ask a huge question. How much of who we think we are is actually changeable? So, okay, we've got all of these incredible self-reported changes. People feeling less anxious, being more flexible, even their personality shifting. But what is actually happening inside the brain to make all this possible? Is there a biological reason for these huge psychological shifts? To find out, we have to go deep into the science. We're going to look at a landmark study from the journal Nature that used advanced brain imaging to literally watch the brain on psilocybin in real time.
Okay, so imagine your brain is like a big city. You've got different neighborhoods, and each one has a special job. Vision, language, movement, you get the idea. And one of the most important neighborhoods is the default mode network. You can kind of think of it as the brain's main office or even the seat of our ego. It handles our sense of self, our memories, that inner voice. Well, what this study found is that psilocybin is like a massive citywide music festival. Suddenly, all the barriers between the neighborhoods just dissolve. The entire city becomes one giant, interconnected, desynchronized party.
And just to give you a sense of how big this party is, this quote from the study says it all. The researchers found that psilocybin disrupted the brain's normal chatter more than 3 times as much as a powerful stimulant like methylphenidate, Ritalin. So this isn't some small adjustment. This is a complete temporary overhaul of the brain's entire communication system. And the epicenter of this whole thing, it's that default mode network, the very part of our brain that constructs our sense of self. And this is the most incredible part, truly. What the scientists were seeing on their brain scanners, all that desynchronization, it perfectly matched what the people were actually feeling. That subjective experience of the ego dissolving, of feeling connected to everything, of having a mystical journey, it was right there, visible in the data. The inner world and the outer measurements were telling the exact same story. And how strong was that link? They found a correlation of 0.81. Now, for anyone who's not a stats nerd, a perfect correlation is 1.0. So getting a 0.81 in neuroscience it's almost unheard of. It's an incredibly strong connection. It's basically saying that the more your brain's city became one big interconnected party, the more profound and life-changing the experience felt to you. It's just this stunning piece of evidence that connects our deepest, most spiritual experiences to the actual physical wiring of our brains. Okay, it is so easy to get swept up in how amazing these findings are. I mean, the potential here is obviously huge. But, and this is a really important but, we have to take a step back and be really honest about the full picture. These experiences aren't some magic cure-all, and they are definitely not risk-free. For some people, this journey can be really difficult, and if it's not in the right context, it can even be harmful. So let's talk about the other side of this. And this is a number we all need to really sit with for a moment. In that same big survey that showed all of those positive results, 11% of people said that they were still dealing with negative effects, like mood swings or feeling down, weeks after their experience. This is a really, really vital piece of the puzzle. It's just a sobering reminder that these are incredibly powerful compounds, and they demand our utmost respect and caution. Absolutely. But it's also just as important to remember that for the vast majority, we're talking nearly 90% of people in that study, the positive changes were real and they stuck around. You can see on this timeline that months later, they were still feeling less anxious, less burned out. And that Nature study, it found a physical change in the brain that also persisted, a lasting decrease in the connectivity within that default mode network. That could literally be the biological fingerprint of these long-term benefits. So yes, the risks are real and we have to manage them, but the potential rewards are too. So, after all of that, where do we land? We've gone from the kitchen counter to the very edges of the human mind. We've seen how mushrooms, in these two very different forms, can have a huge impact on our physical and our mental health. So, how can edible mushrooms for mental and physical health really affect us? And what are the key elements we should be thinking about? What does this all mean for the future of how we take care of ourselves? That really is one of the biggest questions, isn't it, Sue? Can mushrooms just do it all for us? And the answer seems to be, well, it's complicated. The evidence is so strong for specific things, right? Better mental health from psilocybin, better thyroid function from regular mushrooms. But the psilocybin study didn't show a big general boost in physical health. The benefits seemed targeted. And this really highlights a much bigger truth. Understanding edible mushrooms for mental and physical health and making healthy daily choices for diet, behaviors, and medical care is critical to our physical and mental health and recovery from conditions like hypertension. That is so true. Maybe the biggest lesson from all of this is that our health isn't just a bunch of separate boxes. Our bodies and our minds are so deeply, fundamentally connected. Everything matters. What we eat, how we live, our environment, it all plays a part. And thinking about edible mushrooms for mental and physical health really aligns our bodies to a healthy environment for both mental and physical success. I really believe this research suggests our body's health is connected to our diet, actions, nutrition, sunlight, fresh air, personal energy, and our clarity routine of alignment of our actions, words, and thoughts. It's a really beautiful and, I think, empowering way to look at health, isn't it? It's about finally recognizing that we aren't separate from the world we live in. The food we eat, the air we breathe, the thoughts we think, it all becomes part of us. And when we start seeing those connections, we can make choices that truly nourish our whole self, not just one isolated part. And at its core, as that first study showed us so clearly, eating mushrooms can be linked to an overall healthy body. And that leaves us with this one last huge question, a question that really gets to the core of what it means to be human. If a single encounter with a fungus can so profoundly reshape our brains, our personalities, our entire sense of self, what does that tell us about the limits of our own potential? Are we so much more flexible, so much more capable of change than we ever dared to imagine? And what other secrets are just waiting for us out there in the natural world? It feels like this journey for all of us has only just begun.